Very good. Written 3 books worth reading. As you know, I've been embedded with Marines. I want to leave you with one singular thought. I've been embedded with Marines quite a few times in the last few years, and I have to tell you, our Marine Corps today is the best ever. It's far better than when I was in. When I see Marines perform today, I wonder if I ever wore the same fabric. When I travel, I attend board meetings, I go to schools where I might lecture, where I've gone to school, and I get asked the question where they would learn leadership. Not that I would necessarily know, but they asked me where they thought they should learn leadership. And you know, they don't seem to like the answer. So I've learned over the years when that's the situation, I give it to them straight. And I tell them, I didn't learn leadership from any college 101 course or in any school on leadership. I learned leadership on a little island off the coast of South Carolina. I can't hear, say that again? That doesn't get a hoorah. I learned leadership on a little island off the coast of South Carolina, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, from every NCO and officer I met. Why? Why, Sergeant Bobo? Because they were immersed. They're immersed in a culture of excellence that's founded on virtue and discipline. Semper Fidelis, Marines. Any questions? Politically pithy ones, politically incorrect ones. Any? Oh, right. Stand up.
Where did you go to high school?
Oh, good question. I was raised partially in an orphanage in Chicago, and I ended up my high school years was first in a Catholic seminary called Quigley. I spent 2 years there, and I suffered expulsion. Then I went to St. Patrick's High School. Are you St. Patrick's High School grad? Really? You know, that school is still operating in spite of me. Come see me later. Come see me. And then I was accepted to Notre Dame. Didn't have the resources to go. And so I went to Loyola University, and later I did postgraduate time at Notre Dame, and where I'm going next week to do. I lecture at Notre Dame in ROTC and journalism. I've never had a course on it, but I lecture on journalism, and I lecture on in the business school, which I've had quite a bit of experience. I did 4 PMEs recently, by the way, at San Diego, at boot camp San Diego, and I got there in a theater almost as big as this, and I told the Marines there that I would have been there years ago. I never knew there was a boot camp on the West Coast. And then I said, who went to Parris Island? Who went to Parris Island here? Wow, good. That's the only boot camp. The only boot camp. And then a gunny, one of those grizzled, tough gunnies, you know, with their duty belt and all this stuff, sitting in the front row, scary guy. He says to me, he says, sir, isn't that where girls go to boot camp? Politically incorrect, wow. So I went down the stairs, I got right in front of him. I said, look at me, gunny, it's where real women go to hang out with real men. Oh, you like that one. And then when I was leaving the theater, he grabs me. I was going to go knock me out. He grabs me and says, what's it like going back to boot camp and disrespecting the drill instructors? I said, gunny, it's priceless. Any more questions?
What was it that inspired you to be a writer?
I always liked the idea of being able to send out my message to people. And I stuttered originally. I stuttered, and I was real. Until I went to the Marine Corps, I wasn't very much an outgoing guy. But the Marine Corps changes people. But what happened is I was later on in life, after I got away from inner city Chicago, I became a governor of the Polo Association. I wrote a magazine I started a magazine for 8 years, and no one was contributing. So I came with 3 or 4 pseudonyms, and I wrote articles under other people's names. But I didn't want everybody to know that the magazine was a success, so I used Timothy Monahan and all sorts of other names. And then what happened is I really hadn't done much writing, and then all of a sudden my buddies went off. I always stayed in touch with Marines, and my friends all went off for the first Gulf War, and I sent packages and did other, civilian nonsense. And so when 2003 came, a gentleman named Colonel John Bates, outstanding Marine, nearly 2,000 parachute jumps, infantry, 3 Purple Hearts. He adopted me as a young officer, and he said, I said, I really feel sort of weird. Everybody's going to war without me. He said, well, we're embedding several hundred journalists. And I owned the publishing firm at the time. I didn't do any writing, but I owned the publishing firm that did scientific work. And they said to me, he said, why don't you get embedded? You know a few people in the Marine Corps. So I made a few calls and got absolutely nowhere. So I decided to go to Kuwait where they were staging. And did you go to Kuwait High School? Anyway, I decided to go to Kuwait. I got a nonstop flight with no liquor aboard from New York to Kuwait City. And before I went, I called the president of this company that I owned 85% of stock in Palo Alto, and I said, I need a credential. I need a journalistic credential. The guy's name is Tom, and he says, well, we're a scientific engineering firm. We don't do that type of press. And I said, Tom, I got to have this. And I said, listen, Tom, if I don't get that by the time I arrive in Kuwait, the new president of the company will get me one. Long pause, and Tom says, Mr. Brent, how do you want it to look? So I get to Kuwait, I get my credential, I'm hanging out at a staging place in Kuwait where a public affairs officer, one of the few great public affairs officers named Christopher Hughes, knew me. And I was just sitting around getting nowhere, a lot of Army action going on, and he spotted me there. And all of a sudden I was at the head of the line, got the AMPAC shots and the mop gear, and man, within 90 minutes I was even on some TV thing, and in 90 minutes I was with General Conway at Camp Commando, I think it was. And I spent a couple of months, about 6 weeks, writing 14 stories, which I thought were pretty ordinary. And it turned out they got front page in Honolulu. And the press is kind of, the press is not out, by the way, to make Marines look great. The press is out to find negative stuff. I met some of the other journalists there, and they were in charge with trying to find scandal and things like that. They're not necessarily, but when I wrote stories about the Marine Corps, they were positive. I had Marines proof of them. I wasn't out there to try to bust some 19-year-old for doing his job where everybody else at the mall, all his friends are at the mall having hamburgers. Less than 1% of the people in this country have ever served. So what I did was I came home. I thought it was a pretty pathetic performance. They fired a few scuds and things. There wasn't much danger. I came home. I thought the war was over. I didn't know we had no post-war plan. None. So a year goes by. In March of 2004, the Marine Corps, all of a sudden I'm invited back. I'm giving rides, and I'm on C7. I'm all of a sudden I'm invited back like I was somebody they wanted to have. And I went to Afghanistan and Iraq, and then Djibouti, and then I was there about 2 months. I wrote a great number of hometown stories and other things. I was hired by United Press International, and I was treated really well by the Marine Corps. Generals were picking me up and taking me places, and then I would go on patrols. And whenever I meet an NCO, some guy like you, Sergeant Major, he'd look at me and find out I was a reporter. He looked at me with disgust. And then the general said, well, he's a Marine. He writes positive stuff. And all of a sudden, we'll get you a rifle. And all of a sudden, I was treated pretty well. And they wanted me to go to Djibouti. And I said, I'm not going to Djibouti. I don't know how to spell it. I don't know where it is. And they want me to do stories on Iraq. And finally, the Sergeant Major who started the martial arts program, he convinced me, he did a deal with me. He put me in the martial arts program, and I went to Djibouti for what was supposed to be a couple of days. Got embedded with the French Foreign Legion for a few days. Couldn't take photos of enlisted men because they all serve they serve a 5-year period under the strictest discipline. Then they have a whole new identity. They're all criminals. So I had Djibouti, and then I went back in September of '04, and I was in Djibouti and Afghanistan. Finally, late in September, I was in Fallujah, and I was with a general. And we were a convoy, and it's kind of an interesting story. We got into Fallujah at the end of an ambush, and everybody was kind of shook up. and the staff sergeant in charge of the 6 vehicles is unloading the vehicles. I took my helmet bag out in where I keep my computer, and he's handing it to me, and he looks at it, and there's a little sticker from the 2nd Battalion, 24th Marines in Chicago. And all these Marines knew I was a reporter, therefore they thought I was scum, I guess. And so he looks at me in front of all these Marines, a couple of colonels, generals, and NCOs, and he says, "How did someone like you get this?" You know, and I looked at him and I said, "Because that's my unit, asshole." And all those Marines were from my unit. 3 months later, I was in Chicago with the Archbishop of Chicago, and we had a big Italian restaurant, and we had all those Marines and their Charlies and my daughter and some friends, and we just, at the end of it, we got them saying all 3 verses of the Marines hymn. And in November, I was the birthday ball guest speaker for my old unit. So, as I said before, once a Marine. Thank you.